And in this age of new education system of being, having access to AI and tools, people are getting away with some kind of basic skills of reading. I've been using AI tool and giving voice prompts. My typing skills have slowed down.
Great works of literature are about character. They are gateways to empathy. And they give you perspectives on things that you can't easily get yourself through lived experience. Policies themselves exposed to rigorous scrutiny and criticism, and unvarnished criticism in many instances. What about free speech? I think it's got such an important instrumental value in testing ideas.
The world was talking about war, and in the Senate we were talking about one senator was telling the other one that she has called me the B word.
They're on the side of allowing people to express unpopular views rather than trying to outlaw them.
I ask you to read a passage from the book, The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
Oh, of course you can. And I was joking with you before. It's very famous, people know. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of light.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Welcome, Senator Varun Ghosh. How are you?
Very well, thank you, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for your time today, and so glad to be having you. After doing almost 150 odd conversations, I have arrived at your level to have this conversation. Before we go into deep dive into public policy and any views on many things, I would like you to share your story of growing up, your forming of policy brain, your understanding of the landscape and the political landscape broadly.
Well, that's a very broad question, but let me start at the beginning, which is that I was born in Canberra. Both my parents had migrated here from India. My father had won a scholarship to do a PhD at the Australian National University, and my mother came with him. And then across the next, let's say, 18 years, we moved around Australia to different places. So we were in Canberra first, then we moved to Sydney for my mother's job, then to Brisbane for my father's, and then to Perth after that. So I moved to Perth when I was about 12, and there were little interludes in Kingston, Ontario, and Manhattan in New York as well.
Wow. And growing up in different cities, you would have a different... Were you able to form friendships across different cities? And how have you carried those friendships as you grew up?
It's a great question. I think the biggest thing that it meant growing up was that our family was very close. Because when you're moving cities, your parents and your brother are the ones you're closest to, and particularly when you first arrive in your city and you're trying to make friends, that's a very important foundation. But I found communities almost everywhere I went through sports clubs in the most part. Obviously you meet friends at school, but I played cricket and hockey and at times soccer and tennis and a variety of other sports, very poorly I might add. But that was a really nice way of both finding a sort of anchor in the community and also making friends.
And as you have, through your academic journey, you went through a legal curriculum. What kind of purpose and values have been, inculcated in you, or have you evolved your purpose across, whether it's, the house, the family, the moving from one city to another city, and then finding new friends and being open to taking the risk of having interactions with a new set of people and then making new friends, from there to getting into the legal. So how has your purpose/values evolved?
I'm not sure that they necessarily evolve, but they probably broaden, and that you apply them in a different series of contexts. I mean, in a family context, the values I was very much brought up with were around honesty and integrity. My parents spoke very openly with me and my brother at a very young age, and placed emphasis on that. You obviously saw through their example the tremendous amount of hard work that they did, both professionally and looking after us. And so hard work is one of those core values. And then I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of something very interesting. I think when you move to a new place, you have to be open, and you have to treat people with respect, but you're also very conscious of when people treat you with respect or the alternative. And you respond very favourably to the former and not so favourably to the latter. So I think treating people with respect is also one of my core values. Now, in terms of the legal part that you raised, because that's the law is an interesting profession. One of the things that attracted me to it was that it was a profession that had these standards that applied to it. But particularly, for instance, when I was a barrister in Perth, when you appear in front of a court, your reputation and your consistent honesty with the court is one of the most valuable attributes you can have. And so you must always be incredibly careful to have a proper basis for what you say to a court and to essentially assist the court in a way that is not only not misleading, but is substantively truthful. And I think that's a vital value that was definitely there in my childhood, but you saw in the court system how important it was for the administration of justice in Australia.
From the courtroom point of view, when you are standing in court, it takes a bit of I've been in a courtroom and I've observed a few cases here and there, and when you can see that power play between the two sides. You can see the body language, you can see the tonality of the voice, and then you see both barristers playing their best. And then, yes, they have their integrity in place, but I think they are very much flamboyant with the words and the language.
Well, there's two aspects to that. I think the first is there are lots and lots of different styles of advocacy. So there are barristers who are more flamboyant, or that are more theatrical in the way that they approach things. That's true in politics as well, I should add. But there are also others who are incredibly measured and who rely on the reasonableness of the propositions they're putting and the volume of preparation they've done to win the day. And I'm not sure you could universally say in a courtroom scenario which is more successful. I think barristers who are very well prepared were more successful in my experience, but also you have to be authentic to yourself. If you're not someone who is naturally flamboyant or theatrical, it looks very put on or artificial when you try to do that. So you've got to find your own style and be authentic.
Or probably somebody wanted to go to WAPA. They didn't go to WAPA, they went to UWA for law. So that's why they're trying to be the theatrics in the courtroom.
Well, you're always careful about attributing that to people. I'm sure there are lots of people who end up in politics who might have had theatrical ambitions in earlier life as well. But I think, again, it's you've got to be true to who you are. And particularly in a courtroom, there is really very little room for not being substantive. So I was a civil barrister rather than a criminal barrister, and I think if you're addressing a jury, there is perhaps room for more of that persuasive oratory that reaches to emotion. But in a commercial trial that's in front of a judge,
it's very factual.
It's very factual. It's very substantive. You need to have your evidence or your authorities or your propositions very carefully prepared and be ready to defend them.
And politics as broadly is the fight of ideas, how my idea is better than yours and yours is, so a good idea shall sustain and shall win in the end. As you have evolved your understanding of politics and you getting and diving into one, how has your political viewpoint or political worldview has evolved, and then what it is right now?
So I think at the start of that sentence, you said something that was both very optimistic and an idea that I share, which is that if you have a good policy idea that is good for Australia and you're able to communicate it well, then that policy idea can and should succeed. And that view and that optimism hasn't changed in the 2 years I've been in Parliament. I should say I've only been there 2 years, so it's not like I'm a veteran of the place yet. But I think that notion is one that we should hew very closely to in terms of how we develop policies, which is you have a policy that is designed to bring a certain welfare or benefit to the Australian people. It's based in evidence. You communicate that to the Australian people or your electorate. You gain support for that idea, and then you implement it and hopefully see it sustained and that benefit delivered. So that idea of politics, that kind of process, is something that I still very much believe in.
And coming to your political worldview, so how do you, because I don't want to do the binary with you, left or right, but what is your broader in terms of different policy views? Where do you sit as a political animal?
Well, I'm in the Labor Party, so I am broadly speaking on what would normally be called the left of politics. And I think I'm probably in the centre left rather than the extreme left in terms of my philosophy. My starting point for a lot of these ideas comes from two particular individuals. One was a philosopher called John Rawls, who wrote a book called The Theory of Justice, which I found incredibly persuasive when I was younger. And that is the idea that you should design your society from behind a veil of ignorance, so that you set up the structures and the way people are allocated resources in a way that you would, not knowing where you or your family would end up in that system.
Yeah.
That is to say, you want to set up a fundamentally fair system. It's not necessarily a precisely equal one, but one in which there is opportunity to succeed, and those opportunities are available to everyone. So I found that idea very persuasive. I was also, someone who's very interested in constitutional law at university, a fan of an American jurisprudence author called John Rawls, who was talking about democratic integrity as a core element of constitutional system. So if you keep the channels of political change clear, you have good free speech protection, you have fair elections, you have an opportunity to go to the people with ideas, test those ideas, have people then review and effect cast judgment on them at another election, then you will have a system that is also self-correcting.
Yeah.
So if you have a system that's fundamentally fair and it's also got an ability to improve, those ideas were very persuasive in my political kind of journey or in my political thinking.
I think that the idea of the veil of ignorance, that it should be fair to the majority. It might not be fair to everybody. It should be fair to the majority of the population, because people are dealt different cards in their life. So everybody is starting at a different starting point. But it should be broadly fair to the majority. Is the idea of the veil of ignorance that assuming when you design a system, but the designers should be ignorant, or the designers should be smart enough to understand the ignorance is important key aspect of the system to be designed?
Well, I think
there's a lot of intellect required when you have to accept, removing your ego away, saying, I need to accept that there's everybody. You have some ignorance in terms of what you don't know. You have to go and find facts. You have to look for evidence. You look for pure insights before you do a judgment call on policy.
So I think the ignorance has to be about where your place is in society, not about society and how structures work more generally. Obviously, if you're designing a society from behind this veil of ignorance, you want the person doing that designing or the group doing that designing to be very thoughtful.
Yeah.
And then philosophically, you look at the things that would make a society fair, that the extremes at either end are not too stark, that people, no matter where they're born into that society, have an opportunity to succeed, and that opportunity is, if not perfectly distributed, then at least open to everyone. And then how do you translate that once you're in a real society? I mean, the veil of ignorance is a thought experiment. When you're in a real society, it involves looking at programs, looking at policies and structures that are in place, and seeing how they've played through over time, evaluating them on the basis of evidence, and trying to determine whether or not they're succeeding in achieving those core goals of opportunity and fairness.
Can we elaborate that idea of the fairness through one of the, across the history of federation, what public policy idea do you think have led to fairness for the majority?
Well, I think there are two that are very important to me and very important to the Australian Labor Party. The first is education. I think education is one of those great opportunity enablers, and the provision of high quality public education from an early childhood stage all the way through to a primary school, secondary school, and then university stage, or vocational education stage, is very important. And I think that's one of those policy areas that is transformative of people's lives. And by making it accessible to everyone, you really open up opportunity in a way that almost nothing else does. I said two, I've got three, I'm sorry.
Please do three.
The second is, I think you need to have an economic system that has secure and well-paying jobs at the end of it. For almost everyone. Again, that's not a quality of precise outcome.
Yeah.
But you must have a minimum standard that people who have a full-time job can achieve some measure of security in their lives, can provide for families, and can live, a kind of life that at least allows them some opportunity to flourish. And so that's point two. And point three, and this is something that, as a child of two doctors and brother's a doctor, public health care. is vital. So Medicare in this country, it's called other things in other countries, is also vital, because you cannot have a situation where if you get sick, you are bankrupted, or if you get sick, you lose your job, or if you get sick, your family suffers an enormous setback because you can't have access to treatment. And I lived in the United States for just shy of 3 years, and one of the interesting statistics there prior to the enacting of Obamacare was that the number one cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States was illness. So I think if you had 3 ideas that would really help that idea of fairness in a practical sense and across the long term, it's accessible, high quality public education. It's an economy that's generating secure, well-paid jobs, and it is a society that provides public health care to ensure that no matter where you sit in society, you're going to have access to health care, and the consequences, either from a well-being or a cost perspective, are not ruinous.
So one is access to education on the first idea, and the effectiveness of education, the 2 parts to the play. And as we have observed in literacy and numeracy scales across OECD countries, the numbers are dipping. Comparing some cohorts, but majority of the cohorts, it's going down. What does that strength gives you an idea? What does that mean? Should be reflective on the education system, or is it more nuanced than just having a broad brush argument saying that the education system is not working? That's why there is downward trend on scores.
I do think it's a combination of those things. I think standardised or society-wide or even internationally based testing can be useful to illustrate trends, but it is unlikely to give you a prescription as to what's happening in a particular community in terms of education. If I had to look at 2 or 3 different aspects of what's happening in Australia, I think you would say in the first instance, you've had a situation where there's been quite significant disparity of resourcing among schooling across Australia. And one of the primary achievements, I think, of Jason Clare as the Education Minister and the Albanese government has been to guarantee funding across this next period to the schooling resource standard to every public school. And what that means is the schooling resource standard is a complicated formula by which you determine, it takes into account a range of factors, educational attainment, socioeconomic status, etc. And it comes to an idea of how much resourcing you need to adequately educate a student. And prior to this point, you didn't have that guarantee, and the government said, we're going to bring all of the public schools up to that schooling resource standard. So I think that will make a big difference. The second factor in any education system is the teaching staff, both its efficacy, its quality, but also the situation they find themselves in terms of the environment they're teaching. And if you look at a report that was commissioned by the WA State School Teachers Union a couple of years ago, it was conducted by Carmen Lawrence, called Facing the Facts. One of the consistent complaints or issues that teachers raise is the breadth of issues that they're having to deal with, or the breadth of tasks that they're having to manage in a classroom is getting wider and wider. They're no longer simply involved in instruction. They're involved in a wider range of issues, including dealing with behavioural issues or mental health issues, or there's a sort of mission creep for the teaching task. And so it's not that teachers aren't up to it, and most teachers I've ever met are deeply committed to the welfare and the education of their students. But it's, if you've got that breadth of things you're doing, rather than simply instructing directly or otherwise on how to read, how to write, how to undertake mathematical equations, then it's likely that you're naturally going to have some of those scores come down.
And again, I think it's very important to preface that all ideas need that much airspace to be responded on. You can't oversimplify a difficult concept in a small, nuanced thought. And it has to be more nuanced and more long-form responses to any trends and any work which is happening on policy front as well. You talked about the fairness on the freedom of speech and the idea of that. And in one way to divide the left and the right is, the idea of the collective on one side, the idea of the individual on one side. And how do you see in a functioning democracy, or in an effective democracy, or at least moving democracy, we are moving in the right direction, broadly speaking, what's the role of the area of free speech? What is the role of the area of people to go up and say what they have to say without being in a risk of any criminal offences?
Well, can I say I don't necessarily agree with the idea of that binary between individual and collective on left and right.
Perfect.
I think
agree with you.
The left,
but that's how it's broken up, the left and the right.
Sometimes, but I think the modern left, and particularly the left in the Labor Party, would be one that is encompassing of a number of ideas of the collective and a number of ideas of individual expression and individual thought as well. But to your point about free speech, I think it's got such an important instrumental value in testing ideas, in allowing people not only to express themselves, but also to have, in the public policy space, ideas, proposals, policies themselves exposed to rigorous scrutiny and criticism, and unvarnished criticism in many instances, in order to work out what's best and what's not. And so I think when you're talking about substantive speech about those sorts of issues, then there should be a very wide permission granted to undertake it. But free speech isn't limited, as you'd appreciate. So there's a difference between me calling a really kind of taking apart in a forensic way a policy idea that I don't like, and me yelling fire in a crowded theatre and causing a stampede, or me engaging in a kind of vile and abusive speech towards you that would make you feel unsafe. The first one I mentioned is vital to a functioning democracy.
Yeah.
The last two is far more harmful than any benefit that would be gained from them being freely allowed to be pursued.
Don't you think that parliamentarians get a bit more free pass through parliamentary privilege? And on the day there was the first attack in the Iran war, what happened, and the world was talking about the war, and in the Senate we were talking about, one senator was telling the other one that she has called me the B word, and the other one is, so the level of conversation is very much, I don't know, where do you stand on there in terms of the quality of conversation you need to have at Senate or House of Reps?
Well, I think the first point is a very good one around parliamentary privilege. I think it allows parliamentarians to speak without fear of particularly legal action on issues that are important to them. And at its apex, that's something that allows you to speak very frankly about policy issues. In some instances, it allows you to ventilate information that you've been given by members of the public, or to raise issues in ways that you would otherwise potentially have concerns about. So you don't. It removes the chilling effect of some of the potential sanctions, like a defamation action, from the ability of parliamentarians, that is representatives of the people, to speak freely. Now, is some of the stuff that goes on in the Senate day to day pretty banal? Yeah, it is. The behaviour standards sometimes not what you'd want to see. I think there's almost no doubt about that. I think people get very fired up, but also people do sometimes cross those lines. It doesn't undermine the value of the institution or the importance of the protection that parliamentary privilege offers, because you have these incidents or these occasions where it looks like they are sort of rancorous school children.
And then, from the public point of view, then how does, I'm sort of have a last one on the freedom of speech. How freedom of speech versus doing harm. So there are two. How do you define harm being done? To take a case in point, Bondi. What happened post Bondi? The kind of the structure past the New South Wales government have talked about. So how do you define freedom of speech in those scenarios when it is, there is, yes, for sure there is harm happening. So how far freedom of speech goes is allowed? How do you draw the line?
Well, I think if your speech is inciting violence or causing a form of harm either to individuals or, as I described in those two examples I gave you, where someone's engaging in vitriolic abuse of someone, it's almost an assault, or someone's creating a hazard through their speech, fire in a crowded theatre, that's where you draw the line, where you've got a clear link to violence. That sort of speech is I think, beyond the pale and shouldn't be necessarily protected. But I think in terms of broader free speech protections, we should err on the side of allowing robust debate. We should err on the side of allowing people to express unpopular views, and then allow the debate itself or the community's reaction to those views to be the way in which they are in effect defeated, rather than trying to outlaw them.
In the last 30, 40 years of economic policies turns and the cycles, probably we haven't had the recession which we talked about probably the 90s. What's your observation on the economic policy? How has it gone through in multiple cycles in the last 4 decades? And what more to be done?
Well, that's an incredibly broad question, and I'm not quite sure where to approach it from, but I think the starting point would be that...
From the Keating side of it, the question you were talking about. So if you can start from there, what did you feel? Or Hawk from hockey?
So I think the starting point is that economic policies have to be geared towards the relevant time. Economic policies are not acontextual. You can't just apply the same policy in different scenarios and expect the exact same outcome, or expect the policy to be fit for all purposes. But you've hit on a point that I love talking about, which is the economic reforms of the Hawke-Keating era and what they meant for Australia. And sort of one of the reasons, there are many, but one of the reasons I was really attracted to the Labor Party when I was younger was because I found...
Because Keating wore good suits.
Well, not good suits, but he had both Hawke and Keating had a vision for the country that was beyond the terms of government, that was a 20, 30, 40-year vision. We're still reaping some of the benefits of that, about opening up Australia to the world economically, in order that we could lift living standards, in order that Australia could become an economically more productive and competitive country, while at the same time marrying to that a social wage that ensured that working people weren't left behind. You had the development of Medicare, you had investments in education, you had ways in which they really brought together the various different parts of our community into a Team Australia idea that said, we're committed to this vision, we're going to implement a series of reforms. I don't think they would have necessarily predicted the volatility that flowed from all of them, or some of the hardship that flowed from all of them, and that hardship was very real. But it was with a goal in mind, namely to make Australia a more prosperous place, and I think they succeeded beyond measure, and in fact I think we're still reaping some of the benefits of those reforms here today.
From where we are right now, we are probably through the war period happening right now, and hopefully it stops, because economic policies are not safeguarded just because you're a country and you can't decouple economic policy with global happenings. And how do you see, when you are designing long-term reforms, but the terms are shorter 3-year terms, so economic policy takes 10 years plus to trickle down, to use that word, to everybody. So how do you see, how might we as a country create long-term economic policy outcomes or reforms?
Well, I think the first thing is you've got to have that as your goal. You've got to have the improvement of Australia's economic position across the long term as what you're setting out to do. And I should say that actually policies come in different temporal stages. So you've got policies that are to deal with an acute crisis or an acute problem in a community. You might have policies that look more to the medium term, and you look more to then more to the long term. But I don't think the system, even as it's set up today, prevents you from doing the long term policies. But I think what you really look back to, and if you'll forgive me going back to it, the Hawke and Keating example, is you have a range of policies being developed with that long term vision in mind. You then have a process of communicating and persuading the Australian people that these are the right policies to pursue. And then you have the process of seeing that through with a sort of true fidelity to those reforms in the way you implement them. And yeah, there was a great line from Don Russell, who was Paul Keating's chief of staff for a very long time, and he was describing one of the attributes Keating had, and he said it was that once he's worked out what he thinks is the right policy, he's willing to take the punt on implementing that policy, which is to say going full bore at persuading people that it's the right thing to do and then implementing it, rather than having a little bit of everything and therefore not having anything at all by way of meaningful reform. So I think that sort of model of leadership is still one that the Australian people would be very receptive to. There are different challenges today in the media environment, social media environment, attention spans. There's a fair amount of disaggregation of political loyalty in the community. But I think if you had leadership, and I think you do in the Albanese government and in Treasurer Chalmers, that had a vision for where the country should be economically, and goes and presents policies consistent with that vision, that this political system is still capable of delivering on long-term structural reform.
Again, on the economic policy, just to one more, if you have to pick up from those three ideas of education, economic platform, and then health, what focus areas do you want to focus on if you have to focus on the next 20 years of reform, so that one could reap that economic benefits of higher GDP growth rate, more availability of better healthcare and education solutions for everybody? So what kind of economic reform which could be supported, which could support those three areas as well?
Well, the centre of my kind of political thinking is an idea that there are lots and lots of things that as a Labor person and as a Labor government you want to implement. And many of those things, for instance, in an education or in a healthcare context, take money. You can't do it without money. And so you need to have a growing, dynamic, resilient economy that's the engine room of these other things that you can do. Now, they are mutually reinforcing, as you've just identified. So a good education system plugs intelligent and skilled people into an economy, it helps. If people are able to get primary health care and spend less time out of work with chronic diseases, or are able to recover quicker because they have access to good health care from injuries or illnesses, then that helps the economy. But when we're talking about how we fund some of those things, it's got to be around the two core principles that I think guide most Labor economic thinking, which is you need sustained economic growth, and you need a system that's in place that allows the Australian people to share in that growth, rather than it being sort of squirreled away or aggregated to one end of the market or to a small number of people or companies. Now, in terms of that economic growth, it's a function of skilling up a workforce, it's a function of taking advantage of opportunities in areas where Australia has a natural advantage, it's a function of encouraging investment into Australia so we can continue to be at that cutting edge. And I look at Western Australia in particular, and I'm really excited about the economic prospects of WA, not least of which because I think we've got a wonderful population. It's an attractive place for people to come to as well, that can realise those opportunities. You just look at the resources industry and the diversity that's bringing with it. I mean, there's energy, oil and gas, there's renewable energy opportunities. Obviously, iron ore has been the absolute kind of foundation of a lot of our recent economic prosperity, but WA has enormous critical mineral resources that we're only just starting to work out how to develop, and hopefully will continue to develop economically. We look at our agricultural sector, which is world standard. And it's one of the cool parts about my job is I was talking to the ambassador from Mexico the other day, and he was commenting on how much Western Australian barley Mexico imports to put into their beer. And it's sort of these connections and these global opportunities for the Western Australian economy that really excite me. And then, of course, and it's relevant in a range of different things, obviously, with HMAS Sterling and the likely development of or the way in which the Henderson precinct will develop. You've also got a defence industry that's going to be growing and growing in the coming decades in Western Australia. So all of these things are exciting drivers of growth, how do we maximise that? How do we attract investment? How do we stay competitive so that we can, again, really take full advantage of those opportunities? And then how do we have structures in place that make sure that the fruits of that economic success are shared with Western Australians and Australians more generally?
I sat through one of your presentations on the idea of multiculturalism / immigration. Again, the right and the left devise that idea into a different fashion, but I want, if you can, with nuance, if you can identify why multiculturalism / immigration from an economic policy, is that from an economic lever / economic policy point of view, is that a good lever?
Well, I think it's good if it's well designed. So I'm the child of my...
With the veil of ignorance.
No, actually not so much with the veil of ignorance, with Australia's national interest firmly in the foreground.
Okay.
Or as the key prism through which we're looking through. So when you're developing policies for a nation, you want to have your eye firmly fixed on what is in Australia's national interest. Okay. And in a democracy, you also need to have an eye on what the community wants. And the community needs to be brought along with policy ideas, or needs to accept different policy ideas are in the national interest in order to have sustained support for them. So those are the two aspects that I primarily focus on in the migration debate. And so I think you do need to get into the detail of what our migration program looks like. The skilled migration program to Australia, permanent skilled migration program to Australia, has been a significant driver of GDP growth. It's been a significant driver of the acquisition of skills as needed in the economy. And I think it will remain a really important part of how Australia continues to grow and prosper economically. There are other aspects of the immigration stream, particularly the temporary migration stream, that probably in the last, say, 15 years have become less tethered to the direct national interest and have ended up sort of a little bit as streams on their own and without necessarily the rigour and integrity and design features that they needed to serve the national interest. And so that's an area where I think we do need to focus. But if you listen to Tony Burke or to Matt Thistlethwaite on this, they're acutely aware of it. That's an area where they're trying to bring numbers down, and that I think is both good for Australia and it responds to what we're hearing in the community.
When we, off the camera, we were talking about your skills in literature and your repertoire of the books you read and you have read in the past. Could you talk about the books you like, the kind of literature you like, and would like you to share a bit more on that?
Sure. So I'm no pretense to literary skill, but I love reading, and that's something that has, again, to go all the way back to where we started. My parents, our house was full of books. We were always read to when we were younger, and so books are a really important part of my life. So I love a really wide range of things. I think I said to you before that one of my favourite novels, classics, was A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, but I think on the novel side of things, the books I read most often are Agatha Christie novels or detective novels, Jane Harper in Australia. So when I'm relaxing or I'm on a plane ride home and I'm exhausted, that's what I enjoy reading. More generally, I read a lot of non-fiction, particularly narrative non-fiction. I love stories that are, in fact, true stories that get told. The two that are popping into my head right now are Sebastian Junger's A Perfect Storm, about a fishing boat off Massachusetts that got swallowed up by an enormous storm. And then a book that I was just revisiting yesterday, which is Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. But more generally, I think I really do skew towards non-fiction generally, and I love almost any topic where the author has gotten into sufficient detail and shows some level of passion for it, because I think once you get beyond a certain level of detail, any subject is interesting.
Because we were talking about education as key point in the opening, and reading skills are part of education, and literature and poetry and theatre. All of those skills are critical, and in this age of new education system of being, having access to AI and tools, people are getting away with some kind of basic skills of reading. I've been using AI tool and giving voice prompts. So as I've been giving voice prompts for the last 4 or 5 months, and my typing skills have slowed down. So my typing speed has slowed down because I've not been typing on my voice prompts. I'm just speaking to it. So how do you see the use of AI in education, and why literature is critical in terms of creating that critical thinking for young people?
I think to be able to get into a really good book, and particularly a piece of literature, is to be able to transport yourself into a different space.
Mm-hmm.
And great works of literature are about character.
Mm-hmm.
They are gateways to empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And they give you perspectives on things that you can't easily get yourself through lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think nothing will end up replacing that in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I do think that the more you can get people back to reading books, and that is reading physical books, not behind a screen.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I still love the act of holding a book and reading it. I think those are experiences and perspectives that you can't substitute with AI, and they're not experiences you can substitute with potted summaries. You've got to get into the marrow of a story in order to get those full benefits. So I think there's no doubt that remains a really important thing for children and adults to continue to do. But one of the interesting things in the technological space is all this information that's now coming out about how short everyone's attention span is getting.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's through short videos or social media, or some on the internet call it the BrainRot emergency, is that children and adults are losing that ability to focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something we need to look at very closely in terms of how do we avoid that, because I think once you lose that skill to sit and to quietly and patiently read a book and to get into the characters, and as I said, develop that empathy, develop the idea that there are multiple perspectives, develop the idea that human relations and things in the world have nuance and complexity to them, something that is not captured in a 15-second attack video on Instagram or TikTok, or a kind of nonsense video in those environments. Once you lose that, I think society becomes much less rich. And so, the federal government has passed a world-first social media ban for those people under 16. It's now something that lots of other countries are looking at. And I think more generally in our society, we should look at ways, it might not be through government regulation, but it may well be through a greater understanding and a better kind of education around how pernicious some of these technologies are for our brains and for our attention spans, and returning to an old book to be able to sit and read quietly and do nothing else for a period.
In conclusion, could I ask you to read a passage from the book Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens?
Oh, of course you can. And I was joking with you before. How long have you got? Because the opening passage and the closing passage of this book are among my favourite pieces of writing in the world. I'll do the short form version. But A Tale of Two Cities is about it's a love story set in the middle of the French Revolution, and it is beautiful in terms of both the broad spectrum that it paints, the landscapes that it paints, and then the deeply personal individual story. And of course it doesn't hurt that Sidney Carton's a lawyer, so I had a natural sympathy and affinity for him as well. But this is the opening line, and it's the name of the chapter is The Period. It's very famous, people will know it. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on it being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. So that's the opening lines of the book.
It's like a piece of poetry.
It really is. And the closing lines, and look, there's the last, and it's the name of the last chapter in the book is it's a piece that still makes me want to cry. Is called "The Footsteps Die Out Forever," and I don't. Spoiler alert on Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It's been around a little time. It's an immensely sad ending in which the main character makes a sacrifice for love, and the lines. Look, I could read a page and a half, but I won't. I'll just read this last bit, which is, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known."
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ghosh. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.